Okay, awesome.
Okay, all right. So I'll get us started with a little introduction. Thank you everyone for being here. I think this is our third. Actually, is this our third workshop, NAPO Zoom workshop, being offered and hosted by NAPO 2022 fellows. And today's workshop, like all the others, are going to be posted on our YouTube page, so people can watch this at their own time. We have a rich offering of workshops so far. Today's workshop by Mary Leauna. I'm sorry, I think I mispronounced your name again. How do you pronounce?
Leauna.
Leauna, Mary Leauna Christensen. Is called the Elegiac Hybrid Workshop. So I'll introduce Mary here. Mary Leauna Christensen is an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, is a PhD candidate right now at the University of Southern Mississippi. Mary is managing editor of The Swamp Literary Magazine. Her work can be found in Cream City Review, the Laurel Review, Southern Humanities Review, Denver Quarterly, and the Gettysburg Review, among others. She was also named a 2022 Indigenous Nations Poets Fellow. A few little announcements about just today. So this year is our second annual Indigenous Nations Poets Retreat for emerging Native writers and for fellows. Last year was our first one, and Mary was one of the inaugural NAPO fellows. This April will be our second retreat, and we're bringing in some from last year and some new fellows. So we'll be just growing and a vibrant community of writers, and hopefully we'll have many more workshops like this that we can offer free to the public. Another announcement is that we're going to be having a reading of the fellows from the 2022 fellowship class on Tuesday, February 28th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. So mark your calendars for the fellows reading on Tuesday, February 28th, 6:30 p.m. Central Time. I think that's about it. Ashley, any other news that we should share before we get started?
Nothing for me. That's about it.
All right. Okay, well, great.
Right.
Well, I'll turn it over to you, Mary. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to sit in on your class.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction and for having me here. I'm really excited to share this workshop. And I'm really excited that people will be watching this on YouTube as well. So I have taught a version of this workshop before because I'm really interested in both hybrid work and elegy and the intersection between those two. However, like this version, I really thought about like my other kind of like interest, which is the relationship between like Indigenous writing and hybrid. So I feel like a lot of contemporary Indigenous writers are writing type of hybrid. And in many ways, at least the folks that I read, and maybe it's because of the work that I write, I'm just kind of taken by elegy. So a lot of the writers I read are also writing elegy. So I was kind of seeing this like, I don't know, like three-way map between like hybrid work, Indigenous writers and elegy. And so I've been really fascinated with how all three of those things are working together. So that's kind of what this workshop is really focusing on. So this version of the workshop is really amplifying those Indigenous voices that are kind of writing hybrid and my thoughts as to like why and how Indigenous person can really write hybrid work. So I do have a PowerPoint that kind of shares my thoughts and some examples and all that good stuff. But I wanted to take a few minutes to see if anyone had their own thoughts about like hybrid. Like, do you write hybrid? Do you write elegy? Do you have any thoughts on either of those things?
I am definitely excited to learn more. I don't usually write in that style, so I'm really excited to learn from you.
Well, hopefully you learned something.
Too. This is a great topic to, I'm eager to hear more about it. In the classes that I teach, we often come across this topic of, what is hybrid? and people are really curious. And, I usually say, well, there's really no singular definition of what hybrid is. And also hybrid is such a contemporary term that it assumes that it hasn't been done before. And what I often know, and I'm really interested to hear your take on it because I don't really know why, but with Indigenous writers particularly, we have a long history of writing in multiple forms and producing books that have prose and photographs, like Leslie Silko's Storyteller or Mama Day, or, a lot of original text. Joy Harjo has a lot of prose and poetry, which I think all of that is hybrid. It's anything that kind of crosses genre. And we have a lot of that in our literary heritage. And I think it's just an important point and an interesting one. And also I'm curious as to why as well, that we've never really stayed within genre boundaries. And now it's increasingly popular, poetics, hybrid poetics, but I feel like it's something we've been doing and our poetry teachers and ancestors have been doing for a long time.
I think we definitely have this history of it. And I think I was just getting really fascinated with just noticing how much hybrid. And then I was kind of expanding like what I considered hybrid based on what I was reading, especially during the last year or two when I was building my comprehensive exam reading list, because my main focus is Indigenous, like contemporary Indigenous literature. So I was really like noticing this kind of, I don't want to call it trends, it's something we have been doing, but that it was something that we were doing a lot of. And so I hope that my PowerPoint kind of explains things a little better than I can, just kind of rambling here. So I'm going to share my screen and hope it works. Okay, give me a second. Woohoo. Okay, can we see everything?
Looks good to me.
Cool. Sorry for like my desktop, which is an image of Mulder from the X-Files. Okay, so I'm just going to dive into the PowerPoint. Oh, that skipped ahead a lot. Okay, so can everyone see everything okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so why does hybrid go hand in hand with elegiac writing? And you can tell that I'm also a teacher because it's exactly what I'm doing, like making PowerPoints and all that. So grief and grieving is obviously like non-linear and there is no right or wrong way to mourn. I feel like people try to tell us how to do that. And there is no like right way. And for me, I see grief as a kind of liminal space because, it's just a really liminal process because again, there is no right or wrong way. Like you can be feeling great like a few weeks after like the event or the loss, and then 6 months down the road, you can be like sobbing again, right? And I find that it exists outside the binary, like hybrid writing does. And I feel like, at least as like a mixed race person, and as like an Indigenous person living in, the world that we're living in today, I feel like I exist in like a liminal space. So I think that's why I'm at least personally drawn to hybrid work. And for me, hybrid, again, really aligns with that nonlinear aspect of grief and mourning. And hybrid itself suggests there's multiple ways of something, like there's multiple ways to write and play and examine. And I kind of call this like elegiac freedom. And like the elegiac freedom, hybrid writing and the break, like it allows the breaking of any imposed guidelines and trends found in like Western writing or canon and grammar. And it just allows that room to examine grief. And for me, it allows me room to process grief, especially as someone who, as I consider like I'm in an active state of mourning. Within the last few years, I've lost both my grandmother who raised me and my mother, just kind of back to back, kind of unexpectedly. And for me, like writing is how I process that. And I think kind of touching quickly on something I'll talk about more in a second, I think hybrid allows us, specifically as like Indigenous people, to break away from what Western writing says we have to do, and what Western tradition says is the correct way of doing something. We can break language, we can ignore grammar, and I find like a lot of relief in that, I think. And I just like, is this poem gonna have a period? Is this poem gonna have no punctuation? Is this poem gonna look like a block of text? Um, Things like that. Okay, and then quick, I guess what is elegy is a good next stepping stone. And what Western canon kind of tells us is elegy is it's technically derived from an ancient Greek form, that had meter. But elegy, as it is written and thought of today, has no true formal restrictions. And again, I think that really allows us to play with it. Because again, there's no right or wrong way to grieve or mourn. There's no set way of writing an elegy. And an elegy doesn't have to elegize like a specific person. It can elegize like a memory, a place, like a hope, even a word, things like that. And again, like elegiac freedom allows room for the examination and processing of grief. But that doesn't mean that the poem or the piece that you're writing has to have any hope or happy ending. I know I've talked to people about that, how they expect like, oh, like this, you're talking about this awful thing that happened. And it's sad, and it makes your reader sad, so that you have to have like a glimmer of hope or a happy ending at the end to make readers want to read it. And I don't think so. Like, I don't want to force what I'm writing to be happy or have hope if it's something that doesn't feel that way to me at that moment. And I think readers can relate, even if maybe they haven't lost a mother or whatever. There's always that we always have those moments that we don't feel hope, and that's okay. Like, that's just a normal part of being a person. And we don't have to have an happy ending for for everything. It's just not like relatable or realistic in a lot of situations. And again, algae writing invites experimentation and play, that hybrid does, I think. And what does hybrid writing look like? And I think it can look like a lot of things. And typically when we think of hybrid writing, we think of prose poems, flash fiction, flash nonfiction, which I think is getting like more and more popular, it seems. Braid essays, lyrical essays, and essays and poems with inserted images, and the inclusion of like outside facts, sources, text, all that good stuff. But as I said a little bit earlier, I found myself personally expanding what I thought hybrid could be defined as. Sorry for the dog barking at the cat in the background. For me, I think hybrid can also look like playing with and using white space, really playing with that page and making something of that Word document. That could be extra space between words, playing again with the page itself, moving phrases around, breaking an essay into sections where it feels more like stanzas, really playing with like the physical space of what you're typing in or on. Again, the breaking of typical grammar, picking and choosing when to use punctuation, when to not, using slashes instead of line breaks, not using line breaks at all, and just letting the line go as far as you can until you hit that Word doc margin. Altering poetic forms, changing sonnets, sessinas, again, just kind of playing and doing what you want to something. And then using non-poetic or what we think of creative forms. So maybe you're writing something in the form of a police bulletin or an obituary or a newspaper article. Maybe you're using parts of those things into what you're writing. And in breaking the fourth wall and collaborating with the reader. And I think that's more than just saying like, hey, reader, like this is what I'm doing here, like addressing the reader. I think it's also asking the reader to do something without explicitly asking that. And what I mean is if we see a poem that is breaking grammar rules, it's maybe using text talk, we're asking the reader to work with us, to work with the poem or the piece, to read that text talk like we would read what we consider like a typical poem. You know, same with if we're playing with space or the shape of a poem or a piece, we're asking the reader to like change their way of thought to read that piece the way that it's intended. I feel like I'm going a mile a minute. So does anyone have any thoughts or things they want to share before I go on?
I'm super fascinated by the breaking the fourth wall and collaborating with the reader point. I feel like I don't see that a lot, and I'm interested to see examples and learn more about it. Have you seen any examples of that recently?
Yeah. Franny Choi gives a really good talk about it. And I think there's something online of her talking about how she thinks about collaborating with the reader and breaking the fourth wall. Um, and I know there's more examples now that I can't think of because you asked. But I think there's definitely like or like Layli Long Solider has a lot of poems that are like shaped really strangely. And I think just having that shape, especially like I think she has one that's like a square and you have to like turn the page to read that. I think that is collaborating with the reader because they're having to work with you to get the point across the poem, to interact with the poem. And I think I consider that like kind of breaking the fourth wall because you're making them do something. Um,
That's such an interesting relationship between the reader and the poet. So cool.
yeah, and I'm again like really fascinated too by it. Um, yeah, because you're interacting with this person you don't know, like maybe years after you've written the poem. Anything else anyone wants to add before I go on? Okay. So what can hybrid writing look like for Indigenous writers? And some of this is going to sound familiar to what I've already said. So I think we can, or at least I consider a piece of hybrid work or like or how should I say this? I consider like an essay or poem or something I'm reading hybrid when I see the inclusion of Indigenous languages. Because that is breaking away from that Western canon and what is expected of us as folks writing in English. And I think including his language, grammar, forms, whatnot, it leads to that unsettling of the English language. And grammar, to me, it feels like a way of taking agency back. And I actually remember us talking about this a little bit during the Interpo retreat. And I think it was Kimberly that was saying that you can usually when you see like Indigenous language included in a poem, the Indigenous language is, you know, it's not short and it's not abbreviated, but the English around it can be, because I think we have this relationship with English as is like, if you want to like call it like a colonizer tongue, that I mean we're not sentimental to it how we might be with the language that we might like in my case in relearning. And we want to showcase that language in its true light and give it the respect that it deserves. And with English, we could just kind of do whatever the heck we want with it. And again, for me, that's freedom. And I really like doing it. Just kind of messing with things. And I think we can also like include like our myths, our folklore, our history. Because I think just doing that is unsettling because we're not supposed to be sharing that stuff. We're not supposed to, be here anymore. And I think that's true with including the Indigenous ways of thought and kind of going against Western linear thinking and linear time. And I guess like, and I don't know if any of you have had this experience where you're writing or trying to explain something and someone else is like, this is really circular. And I was taught that a lot, like in my MFA classes and stuff when I was younger, and in like undergrad classes. And I always kind of thought it was like my like neurodivergence showing through. And it wasn't until a year or two ago where I got to meet some other native writers and I was talking to them and they mentioned like, hey, have you ever been told that you're thinking circular, you're writing is circular? And I didn't realize that was a thing that we just happened to do for some reason. Like it's a common thread. And it's something that I play with now. Like I don't try to correct it. And I think my work is much better for it because it's the way I'm thinking, it's the way I'm processing. And for me, that also really works with elegy and grief because again, it's kind of like it's not linear. And I know that I've had non-Indigenous folks read my work and like appreciate that it can be kind of like circular, for lack of a better word. But then they take it as this experimental practice. And for me, it doesn't feel experimental, it's just the way I think and the way I process things. So it's like a weird relationship that I'm kind of figuring out. Like, do I want people to consider this experimental? Like, do I feel okay when people say that, even if they are appreciating my work? There's like this weird fine line that I'm kind of like trying to navigate. I don't know if anyone else feels that way or have been told that they're writing in like a circular way or like they're not, it's not linear the way they're thinking and writing.
Yes, absolutely. This is Jennifer. Yeah, yeah. I love what you mentioned here about bringing in other kinds of art forms as well,
Mhm.
whether circular or weaving or, likening our forms to, various things that we might know traditionally. So I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking of like a lot because I've seen folks try to incorporate like basket weaving and patterns and stuff into writing, and I think that's really cool. And sometimes I'll read something, I'm like, oh, there feels like threads that come back between poems. Like Jake Skeets' collection, it feels like there's a lot of threads that we revisit throughout the poems in his collection. And the more I read the collection, the more I'm like, oh, this makes me think of like the different aspects of like a basket because we keep getting this like kind of return, this like weaving. Like sorry, again, my dog is gonna bark because I'm on Zoom. And at least for me, I also when I write, I've a few poems where I think about my relationship to beadwork, and how I'm just like really bad at it. And I write about that and I think of things in like, like a drop bead or drop line or thread, and just not something I can physically do with my hands, as someone who also kind of has some chronic pain and issues with their hands. And I section a lot of my poems and I use asterisks, and it was actually a non-Indigenous person who pointed out in a poem that I talk about beadwork, and I do that kind of asterisks instead of like numbers or whatever else people break poem like signify sections. And they're like, this feels like beadwork. Are you trying to make the asterisk beads? And I wasn't, but I find myself doing that more now just because I think it's a really interesting thing to do and think about. And if people think the asterisks are beads, like so be it. But it's just something that I consider, and I see other people do it maybe more intentional than I do. And I'm really fascinated with how they do it. I think Kinsey Allen kind of does something like that. I feel like I've seen work of hers that feels like she's doing that, and I may be wrong. But I think I'm really fascinated with how people do that. And like I have a friend who is a beater, and she takes designs from pottery and baskets and work that and has been working those designs into her beadwork. And I was like, how do I do something like that in my writing? It's been like something I've been thinking about for like a new project. So I just think it's all ways that we can bring ourselves and like our culture and stuff into our writing. And just because we're writing what we're writing, it feels like for me like an unsettling of like the canon and what we're told we're supposed to write. And I really like that because it does feel like we're making kind of our own like we're going back to our own history and including this stuff. And I don't know, I really like it. It feels kind of right to me in a lot of ways. So I actually have an example of a hybrid piece from Natalie Diaz, and it's one that I teach to my world lit students who really like it. And it's like one of their first interactions with hybrid work, and with Indigenous work usually. It's obviously a very prosy looking poem. So I'm gonna read it, and then we can kind of do like the school thing and talk about it. The Mustangs. In another life, my older brother was a beautiful, muscular boy who could jump from a standing position to grab a missed shot right from the rim and either hit a rating outlet on a fast break or spring back up and drop it to the net for an easy 2 points. He had thin ankles, long, lean legs with high calf muscles, balled tight like fists and split like upside down hearts. Runner's legs, jumper's legs, Indian legs. He also had the upper body of a Mojave man, wide chested, broad shoulders, arms and hands that hung down near his knees, like slingshots, and what my mother says, meaning he is a fighter. He played varsity basketball for our small town high school, the Needles Mustangs. They wore royal blue and white. A bright blue Mustang was pinned on the front of the gymnasium, another inside against the brick wall, and a third in a circle on the wooden middle half court. Mustangs. I associate them with basketball. I have felt them in me, hooves rumbling like weather in my ears and sternum, joints of muscle like bolts in my throat. The way my brother must have felt those herds stampeding his veins in those years and done his best to break them. I love my brother best in memories such as this one. I sat in the rattling bleachers of the Needles Mustangs gymnasium with my mother, my father, and all of my siblings, watching my brother run out to the warm-up song, Thunderstruck by AC/DC. It begins with an unhinged chant-like yell, followed by the strike of the world thunder, and then Thunderstruck. The word thunder is growled 15 times, followed by 19 war-cried versions of Thunderstruck. Dressed in Mustang blue tearaway warm-up pants and shirts, my brother and his teammates, some of whom were from our reservation, were all glide and finesse, their high tops barely touching the floor. They circled the court twice before crossing it and moving into a layup drill while Thunderstruck filled the gymnasium. They were all the things they could ever be. They are young kings and conquerors. To that song, they made layup after layup, passed the ball like a planet between them, pulled it back and forth from the floor to their hands, like Mars. Thunderstruck played so loudly that I couldn't hear what my mother hollered to cheer my brother. I could only see her mouth opening and closing. I was 10 years old and realized right there on those bleachers, thundering like guns, that this game had the power to quiet what seems so loud in us, that it might have the power to set the fantastic beast trampling our hearts loose. I saw it in my mother, in my brother, in those wild boys. We ran up and down the length of our lives, all of us, lit by the lights of the gym, toward freedom, we Mustangs. On those nights, we were forgiven for all we would ever do wrong. So what are people's thoughts on this piece?
Hi, my name is Bonnie. I guess it's all new for me, so I wouldn't know in what you were in the piece, like what I'm looking for or what stands out to identify it as an elegy.
Cause I don't think this is a traditional elegy because it's not
Okay.
mourning. I'm sorry, my dog just touched the screen. It's not mourning like a specific like person or
Uh-huh.
place, but I think it is kind of mourning like a history maybe as how that's
Yeah.
at least. Because she's talking about like this thing in them like wanting to get out. And I just, and knowing that a lot of these boys that she's writing about are from a reservation, and the talk of Mustangs and all of that, it feels like his elegy for what is and what could have been.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Kind of the starting with just saying in another life, like it doesn't tell you a lot more, but you kind of just get a sense from that beginning that maybe this didn't happen, or that it wasn't quite, this is kind of an exaggeration or hopefulness of what could have been, but then other things got in the way, or this didn't continue, but it
Mhm.
doesn't seem to like elaborate of like what actually happened. But maybe is it kind of like a phrase like that that sort of clues you in that it's sort of an elegy.
I think so. I think memories too, or pieces too, like I love my brother best in the memories such as this one.
Uh-huh.
I think it like less on like, maybe this is one of the last good memories type of
Like
thing.
the few yeah. Uh-huh.
And I
Okay.
think too, we kind of know a little history about Natalie Diaz. We know that the brother that she typically writes about, did suffer through addiction. And I think this is a piece that kind of relates to that addiction in some way
Mhm.
without clearly stating it. And I think pieces can have like elegiac undertones. And I
Mhm.
think it's a piece that's more of the undertones than maybe in your face, like this is what I'm
Okay.
being upset by. And I think like the opening line that you point out, I think it's one of those kind of clues that there
Okay.
is kind of like elegiac threads or
So it's more subtle or undertones
yeah.
throughout. And then kind of at the end, it says like, it kind of alludes to, something. It says like, it might have the power to set the fantastic beast trampling our hearts loose. Like that, we don't quite know what that's referring to if you just see this in isolation, but that it's kind of giving you sort of this like impression that there's, something that happened, and that, like she's kind of like with looking back to like, what if only like the basketball could have been where things ended or how things continued, I guess.
Like if we can only have this like power that we have on the basketball court or this
Yeah.
feeling, like
Okay.
if we could have this outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we have like lines like, they were all the things they could ever be. They were young kings and conquerors, so like they were the best that they're allowed to be maybe on basketball court and not outside of that because of
Okay.
society and whatnot. And I think essentially too, because we learn that the speaker we can assume is Diaz. She's 10 years old while this is taking place.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, right, as an adult and looking back at this, and I think that's where we get this, like, this is when I love my brother most. Is it's in these kind of memories.
Okay.
So
All
this
right. Thank you. So it's more like subtle or
yeah,
like clues throughout. All right.
yeah, like I'm writing this and looking back at how things were. I
Mm-hmm.
miss those things. I'm mourning how things used to be. But yeah, thank you. Like I do think this is like more undertone elegiac. I guess this is a question for everyone. Do you think this poem would hit the same, or this piece would hit the same if it was what we consider like a more traditional poem and didn't feel as prosy? Didn't have like the long lines and the stanzas that feel kind of like paragraphs.
I think there's something about the density of it, and because it's prose, it, there's a sense of the loudness. You can hear the echoes and the loudness of the court throughout the piece, especially with the really long sentences towards the end. It kind of, we don't have the white space to guide us to make pauses, so we're not really given the opportunity to. We're kind of thrust into the intensity of that memory. And we're seeing things as the memory does. You know, you see the really striking image of the mother opening and closing her mouth, but not hearing what's coming out. That to me, just the image alone feels like an elegiac image, because it has an edge of grief to it. You know, a memory of something you can't quite, you know, you don't know what she's really saying. But yeah, I think the prose kind of creates an atmosphere that helps us feel that thunder.
Exactly. I think the fact that this is so dense that you pointed out, and that we don't have a lot of breathing space, it gets us stuck in that memory right along with the speaker. Like we're stuck straight in with her, and I think that is really powerful because it feels like we're sitting on that pleature too, like we're watching this and we're feeling the movement, we're hearing the songs, we're hearing the game happening, all these kind of things. And I think it's interesting the way that Diaz is able to like put us in there with her. And I think the form plays a lot in allowing that to happen because of the density and the lack of white space or like pauses. So I think,
This is Carrie,
sorry.
and I'm thinking of how Natalie reads this poem, because she'll have her music going on this one, making it the hybrid poem.
Oh, does she include?
Yeah, she plays it.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I like that. And I think, and I guess I hadn't thought about it really until you just mentioned that the fact that we get thunderstruck in here so much that I feel like, yeah, that could be considered like a part of why this is hybrid too, is that we have this song that's threaded throughout so much of the poem. It's kind of like the background song or even like beat of the poem. Yeah, I didn't know she read it with the song. I like that. I guess I hadn't really thought about it too much with the song, besides the fact that the song was there. But yeah, I think that really adds to the hybridity of the piece too.
I think what makes it poem, one of the questions like people ask a lot is, well, it's prose, so what makes it a poem? It could just be a short story. But this piece highlights, really emphasizes several poetic elements. Sound is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So not just because they're playing a song, but the music of the sentences, the music of the syntax throughout the poem, the short inline sentences, the carries a rhythm as well. So we kind of hear that rhythm of the thunder and the stomping feet on the gymnasium floor. So musicality is so central to the piece, even though it's prose. So that's kind of lends to the poetic side. And then the other part is the figurative language. It kind of allows the metaphor to be metaphor, but it's also real. Like Mustangs is the name of the team. But it's also, speaking about Mustang as the kind of the wild horse, and then likening that to the grief in the heart and the desire to set that grief free. So it plays with all those figures. So I think figurative language and music or rhythm are the two things that make this prose piece more poem than prose, even though it's written in prose.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. Like there's the sound qualities, there's the figurative language, and just some of the and just in general, some of the phrasing just feels more lyrical too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is like just a strong example of what a hybrid piece can look like. I do think, like, I personally would consider this like a more traditional hybrid piece because I don't know, I think of prose poems as more traditional hybrid, like something we're more used to maybe. Mostly because they feel really popular like lately. Like I feel like I'm seeing more and more prose poems being written and published. I don't know, and I read a lot of them too. I think they're just like there's something just really nice about writing them. They give you some more room to think in some ways. And then, you know, you kind of have to like do like your own play, like how am I going to make this still feel like it has poetic qualities, even though it may look like microfiction or something like that. And then I like to play with justification too, like how compressed can I make the poem and what does that do to line breaks? And then sometimes with that compression it also works as a really good revisioning process. Like even if you're not going to keep the poem in like that block or prose shape, doing the compressing or even expanding it, if you already have like more typical line breaks, it helps you figure out like, you know, is this word needed? Can I kick it out? You know, I think it's really helpful for editing as well. And it's just something that I like doing. Here are two more examples. Poems by Skeets and poems by Layli Long Solider. I both feel like they do a lot of hybrid work, especially maybe more so Layli Long Solider. Just this whole book where Ash just feels very very hybrid. I don't want to like waste the time we have left reading these poems. They're just things that are here. Examples you can read. Both all three pieces are amazing, I think. And for example, like 38, even though it's broken up in kind of like line breaks or stanzas are really long line breaks. And it feels like you're reading a nonfiction piece. And that actually is a piece that I think really breaks that fourth wall, because she tells you how she's writing the sentence and how to read that sentence. Unfortunately, it's also quite long, so I don't want to spend time on that right now. When I do kind of want to give some writing prompts. I have like 3 writing prompts that I want to share, and I have a couple revisioning prompts, because then I think playing with hybridity and just the idea of like line breaks and what you can do to it really helps see what you're writing in a different light. So these are the prompts. Write an elegy for something non-living. It can be a concept, a word, a feeling, etc. And I like this prompt. It's something that I've done before for myself. I'm like, you know, what is a word that like maybe my grandmother said a lot? Or what is a word that I'm learning in Cherokee? And what does that spur? And then write an elegy for a body part. Insert and find facts about that body part throughout your elegy. Doesn't mean I'm like playing with lately. I'm finally feeling more comfortable writing about my health in my writing. And so I'm like, I have like a poem that a recent poem that kind of plays with elegy for like, I guess kind of my hands, because I've lost like a lot of grip and stuff in my hands. And when I have like flare-ups, I'll drop things all the time and things like that. But it also works as an elegy for my grandmother. Kind of memories that she would do in the kitchen, things that she did, and the things that I've noticed that I do as well in the kitchen. Because both places that we just felt at home in. And then she was dealing with arthritis a lot on her hands and losing some function. And while that's different than what I'm dealing with, there's still these similarities of no longer being able to rely on your hands. And then also like I had a realization like a couple months ago, just looking at my hands, that as I've gotten older, I have the same hand shape as both my grandmother and mother, and I never noticed that until recently. Like I was at the nail salon and I just noticed it. It was like this really strange moment where I'm like, oh my God, these are my hands, but they're not my hands. So I think something like that let me write about both things at once that I was kind of examining my like grief of. And then something that I think can be just done for like kind of anything you want to write if you're just trying to like produce something, you're stuck, is just Google a list of fun facts or a list of facts about whatever you feel like learning about, and pick one of those facts and let that trigger something like a memory or a thought, and just let that then inspire an elegy or whatever else you kind of want to write, even if it's not an elegy. I think that's just a helpful generative tool. And then some revisioning prompts I have, and I kind of already mentioned one, but take a draft of something you already have, and just kind of look at the sentence level and the grammar. How much of the grammar is really needed? Can you ricochet, like periods, commas? Do you even need grammar? Does that work still work and make sense without typical grammar? Can you use text speak? Can you use abbreviations? Can you remove words and still have what you're saying makes sense? And then by doing that, what does that add to the piece? And even if you're just doing that to get out, extra words, to remove fluff, I think it's really helpful. I feel like when I tell my students when they're writing essays, the revisioning tool is like, hey, what is a word that you use a lot of? Like, do you use that a lot? See how many times you use that. See how many times you don't need that word and you can get rid of it. And I think you can do that with poems as well. And maybe sometimes you keep that. And that's just, this poem doesn't need grammar. It doesn't have grammar. And again, take a draft you've already written. If it's a typical prose structure, break it into line breaks, put it in couplets. Where are you going to break that line and why are you breaking it there? And again, you may notice, hey, I don't need this word. I don't need this phrase, or I can make this phrase, this 4-word phrase, a 2-word phrase. And not only line breaks, play with stanzas, play with caesuras, more white space, the shape of the page, just see what happens. Again, that can be a visioning tool. Again, you might just have a new poem. Or if you have what looks like a typical linear poem, put it into a prose block, then play with that justification, compress it, change the shape of it, how compact can you make that poem, kind of like I've already said, what line breaks have been created. And again, you might have just edited a poem, you might have just made something new. And that's really all I have. So I'm going to kind of open the floor to discussion if anyone wants to say things. If you use any of these prompts, I would really if you want to share your work with me, that'd be I love that. If any of these helped you or you found them really interesting, you played with them. I think for me, these are just things I think of, so they're helpful when I'm stuck. But yeah, just opening the floor to discussion. I'm really glad you've all been here, and thank you for having me.
Mary, what's your email so that I can put it in the chat in case people want to share with you?
Oh yeah, I can put it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like these prompts. Thank you. I think it brings up, it's kind of that scary question of once you start taking a draft and then putting it into prose blocks and then looking at different kinds of lineation and stanzas and all of that, you can go back and forth many times, cutting and adding and cutting and adding. And then at what point do you say, okay, I think it's found its form, and there's no answer to that. Of course, it's definitely each individual, the point at which you feel that, for whatever reason it may be, the poem has found itself in this shape. But I think for a lot of people, I think putting it into a prose form is a scary thing to do, because then it might somehow lose whatever integrity you feel it has as a poem. When in fact you do put it in prose poem, oftentimes what happens when I do that is it actually helps me see where the poem itself doesn't have integrity at that moment. By taking out the line breaks, I can actually see more superfluous language. I can see things that I might have been trying too hard to explain, in the same way that taking a prose poem and then putting it into lines helps me see what's not needed, and where I might rearrange things to create a different sense of suspension or order of operations to kind of create the storyline if I'm telling a story or experience. So it's really a great idea to kind of free oneself from formal requirements by implementing other formal requirements. It brings me back to something you had in one of the earlier slides about altering received forms. So working on a sonnet and then altering the sonnet with whatever rule you want to put in. Yeah, thanks for those exercises.
Yeah.
I especially like the elegy for a body part. I think that's very interesting. And because it also thinks about all the senses, the sensory experiences that body part gives us and what is lost without that. That's a really great idea.
Thank you.
Lourdes has Lourdes Vela.
Hi, thank you. See. Hello, thank you so much. I got tremendous amount from it. I've been wanting to put a piece together, similar, more like a recording like Layli Long Solider did, about grass. I don't know if you guys have heard that. And from the territory where I'm from the densest indigenous territory of the Colombian Andes. And so I wrote like a 45-page paper on it, with lots of facts and all that stuff. So I have a lot to draw from. And I used to write poetry years ago. So I appreciate so much what you've shared, because I would love to, I feel like I can somewhat start, and I would love to send it to you and get your feedback, because I do want to record it, because my professor at the university, I graduated, it was a second master's I did. And so I sent her that recording and she loved it. She's teaches Native American studies at one of the universities. And she loved it. So of course she knows my papers. So I told her I wanted to do something similar based on the paper I wrote. And she's like, absolutely. And I want you to send it to me. So I'd love to get your feedback on it. And just thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Very, very grateful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I love anything you say my way, and just hearing you talk about like all this, like this paper, all this work that you have. Have you ever thought about doing something like a lyrical essay? 'Cause that could be really cool because you already have all this like information.
What is it called?
Like a lyrical essay. So like,
Lyrical.
yeah, it's like a creative non-fiction type essay, but it has like all the poetic lyrical qualities. Like I have one that's in my poetry manuscript that I'm working on right now. And it's got footnotes and everything, but it's divided in sections how I would a poem. And it has language and scene structure that feels like a poem. But someone else might be like, this is a piece of nonfiction, like creative nonfiction. And I've seen, of course I can't think of names off the top of my head right now, but I've seen people create poems that half the poem is in the footnotes. And I think that's like,
Wow.
just because you already have all this information, you've written all this research, I think that could be something really cool to play with if it's something that you're interested in. If you're interested in poetry and you have all this research, like I think you can like, create something really cool with all of that.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Great information. Okay, yeah, definitely. I'll be getting in contact with you.
Yeah, can't wait.
Great. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, I don't know if I missed it at the beginning, but where would we find some examples of your work? Like some art, have you written this type of poem, and is it somewhere that we could find?
Trying to think. I think most of what I have published that's available online is like really old. Like embarrassingly old.
Okay.
Like what I have right now, that is published is I think just in print. But if you want to like reach out and send me an email, I'm happy to send you things. But like I said, I think most of what I have that's examples
Okay.
has just been accepted and is not published
It's
yet,
in
or
progress.
it's just in print.
Okay.
But the project I'm working on right now, I'm hoping to start seeing out within the next month or two. Most of it is, well, pretty much all of it is like hybrid. Like I think that's all I write now. Because I wasn't realizing I was doing it, and then I'm like, oh, this is something I'm doing, and it is just I again, because I work with grief writing so much, I think it's
Yeah.
just really what I'm working with right now. The project I'm working on is a full-length poetry manuscript called Motherlines that just talks about the unexpected loss of both my mother and my grandmother, especially because it felt like a breaking of like, well, like a loss of the maternal line, because for Turkeys, like like your clan, everything comes from your mother.
Mhm.
And then both of them passed away in Arizona, where I like grew up and was raised. But my my grandma's family and our reservation, everything is in North Carolina. And most of our family is in North Carolina. And so we moved both of them to like our family cemetery in North Carolina, which is just like a hill between like two uncles' houses. So a lot of my writing also deals with like, that that moving process, that land, and then like the loss of like language and land, like the erosion of land, and just kind of also just the fact that I'm like mixed race and dealing with all of that, as someone who's like raised with the Indigenous side of my family, and not, even though I don't look like them necessarily, but not really being raised around like the white side of my family. So I think because I'm working with this liminal, and I feel like I'm in this liminal space, both like the hybrid really works for me.
Okay.
It's something I just find myself writing, and staying with the fact that I'm writing elegy. I think it all feels hybrid, and I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the chaos in my brain becomes the chaos on the page.
Do you find that this form healing, or that it contributes, like, so, I guess when you were describing the grieving process or thinking about loss of mobility with chronic illness and stuff like that you were sharing, is this
Yeah,
healing?
I think it's helping. And like I said, like writing about the illness is like super, super new to me. It's something I wasn't comfortable with for a very long time. And I've maybe only written like one or two pieces that have touched on that.
Mhm.
'Cause it's something I'm uncomfortable with. Um, in the process of getting like diagnosis and all that. But with I don't know how I would be like standing here or like talking to you guys if I honestly hadn't been writing through the losses I had the past 2 years, of how just shocking they were. Especially my mother was killed by a drunk driver, so there's been a lot of like court cases and stuff. So just being able to write through that process and just getting like my emotions and feelings out, because having the realization that like in my early 30s, I'm now the oldest woman in my family, is really strange, or like my immediate family. And having to take care of like my grandfather, my younger sister, and like all these while being a PhD student and trying to like work and having all these threads of life, being able to write that down and kind of getting again like all that chaos out of my brain on the page in any form and shape it kind of took, really helped me, because like before this, I would have never considered my work hybrid. I would have never really played with I never really played with prose poems, I guess, my work was narrative and like it's like, you know, more narrative maybe in its storytelling qualities, but was very linear and poem shaped, traditional poem shape. So I think working with writing this way and just felt very natural to me, and it's helped tremendously. Like I don't know what I would have done without being able to write.
Yeah, thank you.
I look forward to your book.
I
Yeah.
was I'm hoping it gets finished, it gets picked up. Like how the finishing touches for like
Yeah.
it's also like my dissertation, so I'm like trying to
Yeah.
like few poems getting organized and put in there.
Mhm. That's great. I'm excited. Do let us know when it gets picked up.
I'm hoping. Like it's very much like my hard work right now. Like it feels like all of me is in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that. It's intense. Just at that point where you're just about to finish the book and
Mm.
final pieces. And also if it's attached to the work that you're doing in school, then it's like a full project.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just had one last question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Can you share, like, how is it difficult to get into the discipline of it? Like, I have a lot of fear going back to that paper because it was very emotional. I found out many things I didn't know. The puzzle of my life fit together a lot better after I did a lot of the research and interviewed people in my family and very close to my family. So I find myself scared to go back into that paper and look at it. So I'm just wondering what your process is. How do you have that habit of sitting there and writing and looking at it?
Well, there's definitely been times where I've written something and it's been so like emotionally exhausting that I've had to just like leave my computer and just sit down and just do something else or just not think about that. There's been times where I've written and I'm like not the most disciplined when it comes like I have to write like a poem every week, or I have to write like every morning at 5 a.m. I'm horrible at that. And sometimes I'm like, I honestly wouldn't write if I didn't have like deadlines. Just because I'm just not good at that kind of scheduling. But there have definitely been times where I'm writing, and I've had to sit stuff down, or I've worked on something that have had a deadline, and I procrastinated or whatnot. I was working on the piece, and it just happened to be, you know, maybe more emotional work than I thought it was going to be. And you know, I was just drained for like days afterwards. And I think that's okay. I think just realizing like, hey, this is something that's hard and painful for me. I think that lets me know like, hey, like this is still something I need to like work on, or like sometimes you don't know what's still bothering you until it bothers you. There's been I mentioned to you like lyrical essays. I've been working on one. I started it like shortly after my grandmother died, and it has changed its content now. After my mother died, I lost him 13 months apart. So the essay has changed, and I've worked on that essay for almost 3 years. And I'm still working on it. Because sometimes it's just so heavy for me. I have to just go away from it. And it's funny that you're asking this question because I actually have a deadline for this essay tomorrow. So I've been working on it again, and I've been like, I feel like every 6 months I like try to pull it up and work on it because it's something that I do care about. But it's also like hard work. So I think just giving yourself that time and understanding and knowing that, hey, like this might be hard for me. Like do better than I do and don't wait till deadlines. Like don't know how it's gonna hit you. But I don't know how long ago you wrote this essay. But I would just like give it just to reread. Like you don't have to do any work on it, just read it. And I mean, I think you might see threads like, hey, maybe I want to work on this, maybe I want to write something that's inspired by this or whatnot. But just like read it and see how you feel. And if it's something you need to think about, then let you like give yourself time to think about that. But I think it can be scary, but I think it's also good, even if we're uncomfortable in that moment, to know what is still bothering us. At least for me, like I would like to know, because it lets me know, even if all I learned is, hey, I still need more time, like I'm not ready to write this right now, I think knowing that is helpful. Did that answer your question? I think I just
That's, yes. No, that was great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, like everyone, for being here and for like your great questions and input. I really appreciate it. Really like enjoyed being with you guys tonight.
No, I really was so enjoyed this last hour with you, Mary, and learned a lot. Thank you. It was so articulate, putting together hybridity and elegy and how we can all apply it to our lives, also with grieving. So thank you so much. I think it's probably, yeah, it's about time so we can close up. But everyone else, thank you so much for coming. This is really just the beginning of what we hope NAPO. Oh, hey, everyone there. Haskell. Indigenous Nations Poets. This is only our second year, really new organization. And, beyond our annual retreat, where we bring in, emerging Native writers and poets, what we want to do is keep building the community of emerging Native poets. And then every year the fellows will just, we'll have more fellows this year, and Mary will always be a NAPO fellow. And offering things like this is something that NAPO hopes to be able to do a lot in the future, is free educational opportunities and teaching opportunities. So spread the word about NAPO, our website, indigenousnationspoets.org, right? It's org. Yeah. So check it out. We're always fundraising and growing. Yeah, thank you, Ashley. Ashley just put it in the chat there. And I'm treasurer of NAPO, so it's just a great honor for me to be able to be here today and meet you in person, Mary. I've read your work. I've know you as a fellow, and it's great to meet you, virtually in person. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Stay in touch with us via our website and social media, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Mary.
Bye.
It's good to see you.